if you think back to your 17-year-old self and that vision of being on the beach somewhere, is that still a vision for an older Dan?
No, not at all. So I think when you're 17, or certainly for me, it was like, I want a Lamborghini, I don't want to go to work, and I want all of these nice things.
I'm going to need therapy after this, Dan.
Probably, yeah.
To This Property Life, the podcast where we deep dive into the fascinating world of property investment. I'm Sarah Blaney, and with my co-host Nick Claydon, we bring you real stories from the front lines of the property industry. Each week, we chat with everyday folk, from property veterans to fresh faces, who each share their experiences, challenges, and triumphs in the property market. Our mission is just to show the authentic side of property investment, cutting through the myths and hype and bringing you practical insights and inspiration. And this week we are joined by Dan Cheetham, Director of Your Save Management. Welcome to the podcast, Dan. Where in the world are you?
Hi Sarah, thank you for having me on. So we're a Northwest-based company. I'm currently sat in one of our apartments in Congleton, which is a small market town, probably 30 minutes from Stoke. So most of our units are around this sort of area.
So Dan, just for the benefit of all of our listeners, we had a little chat before we came on air, and you gave me a lot of history in a small amount of years. Tell us, when did you get started in property and just how did it evolve?
Of course. So I wanted to get into property, not because of a passion for it, but because I was quite a lazy teenager and I'd seen people earning rental income and what I perceived not having to do much work in order to generate that each month. So I thought, this is fantastic. I can get paid without having much of a job. I thought the best route in for me would be to become a builder. I thought that I could develop some skills in that industry, save up some money to buy a house, refurb it and start doing flips. So I started a joinery apprenticeship after not enjoying the last few years of school, really. And actually, it turns out I wasn't very good at joinery, so I had to stop that pretty quickly and move into something that wasn't quite so manual or skilled. So I went to go and work for a high street letting agency, and sort of in between this time, I'd come across a property training course. I went on that, and that gave me a very initial insight as to what property could be like for me. And I guess it opened my eyes to the fact that I didn't have to pursue or continue down either the building or the letting agency side of things, that actually I could become a property investor, and by using leverage, below market value deals, etc., that might be a way of me getting into the industry or using investor funds without having my own. So I went on that course when I was 17 years old, and I think the only downside was probably the fact that I was so young, and all I heard over that 3-day weekend was that I could get a credit card, buy a house, and then I'd be able to go and live on the beach. So I kind of left that and rang my bank and said, can I get a credit card? They told me to clear off. I was 17, you're not old enough yet. And then really started to look into it, and the reality of it becoming slightly more challenging set in. So worked at the letting agency and really got to understand the local market, what it was like in terms of tenancy creation, organising and vetting the tenants, dealing with landlords, how that side of things worked, and some small experience of the sales and conveyancing period as well. So I was there for probably just over a year and a half, and then moved to work for a HMO developer who was based in Stoke-on-Trent at the time. They had a fantastic business. So they sourced, renovate and let HMOs, and they did 60 HMO projects in 3 years. And it was great for me.
That's a lot.
It was superb. They had a brilliant business at the time. And for me to get to be part of a startup and watch the whole process and how that benefited the investors, see what I liked about that business, see what I'd have done differently, it was a really pivotal point in my early part of my career. Whilst I was working there, I'd also built up a rent to HMO portfolio in the background as well. It was really, really easy back in those days to do HMOs. I could almost rent a room to anybody of almost any standard, and I was able to acquire rents really, really cheap. I was paying sort of £350 for 3-bed, 4-bed houses a month, which was superb.
So that's the rent that you're paying to the landlord, and then you're forward renting it on to HMO tenants.
That's right. So a very basic model for me that worked really well at the time was I'd probably pay £350 in rent, maybe £300 of bills, and then I would rent 3 rooms out at maybe £350 to £400 a month. So essentially my last room, if it was filled, was my profit. That was a really good income stream for me. So I got to a point where I was 20 years old and I still wasn't this property millionaire that I thought I could be after going on the course. So handed my notice in there and went and started off on my own. So I was doing some consultancy for somebody else who wanted to start a letting agency locally. So that was a HMO-based business. I was doing sourcing for investors. I had my rent to HMO portfolio. And it got to a point where I probably managed around 150 HMO rooms now for 3 years or something like that. And whilst I really enjoyed the cash flow element of it, I think because I was so at the coal face of HMO tenants, I was getting to a point where I was trying to find another alternative income stream rather than having to deal with multiple HMO tenants at any hour of the day. So at this point, I'd met my business partner, who's my current business partner, Richard, who at the time was an A&E doctor. He'd been through some training about serviced accommodation, and he suggested that on the newest HMO or rent to HMO deal I found, that we try putting it on Airbnb instead of down the spare room and open rent model. And I thought, this is a terrible idea. Who is going to come and stay in an Airbnb in Stoke-on-Trent?
Was this pre-COVID or post-COVID?
This was pre-COVID. This was 2019. And we took our first one on, and now we're about 60 managed units later. And it turns out I'm quite wrong. There is a huge demand in Stoke and the other areas that we've moved into on the short stay model.
So you operate predominantly around Stoke, but then sort of graduate out a little bit?
Yeah, that's right. So we cover pretty much just south of Stoke, up towards Manchester, all of the smaller market towns in between. So Altrincham through to Congleton, Sandbach, Macclesfield, Crewe, over towards Chester, and we're looking to move over towards Derby Way as well.
So I think what I picked up when we spoke about what you've done over the last 6 years is that you have hustled and traded hard. That you've really, you've done an awful lot of things and put in an awful lot of effort into the things that you've done. And, when you just sort of give a potted history of, and then I built up a rent to HMO strategy and I managed 150, tenants. And I mean, that's actually, you say it quite easily, but that's a big deal.
Yeah. I think there's definitely not much skill or technical ability involved. It has been work ethic that's kind of allowed me to move through the different things that I've done. And really, I think most of that has just come from a hunger, a desperation, a need to achieve the goals that I'd set out to achieve initially by any means that made sense at the time. And I think the great thing about me being young when I entered into this was that I wasn't necessarily focused, which I think if I was in that place now, that would be a detriment to us.
And, one thing for me, I think, which I want to just delve into for a sec is that I come across an awful lot of people who want to get into property, but they might not feel that they have the capital at the moment. And, they might talk about doing sourcing strategies, or they might look at rent to something, rent to HMO, rent to SA, as a strategy to get into the market without necessarily having that big capital thing. And then they're like, oh no, but why would a landlord ever give their property to me? And there you are at the age of 20 and clearly making a success of that, and then continuing that, over the last sort of 5 or 6 years as well. So, just for people that might be listening who want to look at that as a strategy, what would be your top 2 or 3 tips?
So in terms of rent to rent, I think I wouldn't necessarily turn it into a couple of tips initially. I think the main thing is about becoming somebody that is relatively competent, that can provide that landlord with a genuine solution. So I think the more time that you spend in the market understanding what people's pain points are, you're in a better position to be able to serve and support those in terms of the offering that you provide. So when people ask, why would a landlord ever want to hand me their property? I would encourage you to spend more time around landlords, understand, hear the pain points that they have, because for somebody to come along and offer them potentially a 5-year contract that has some form of guaranteed rent behind it, it's a fantastic proposition for somebody that has been a bit battered and bruised from tenant headaches, maintenance, damage, call-outs, whatever it might well be. In terms of going and securing and acquiring your first couple of rent-to-rent deals, I think, again, that is a degree of networking. So going out, building relationships with agents, individual landlords, doing what you say you're going to do. And again, explain to people the process and what the offering is and how you're going to look after that property and provide them with a good level of asset management, really. Did
you find that you got an awful lot of no's to begin with? And if you did, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, you're really re-jogging my memory now, actually, because that is the case.
I'm going to need therapy after this, Dan.
Probably, yeah. Especially if we start to delve into some of the mistakes that we made earlier days. That was probably one of my biggest strengths. Every no, I knew that it was closer to a yes. I knew that I could possibly turn that into a maybe and then move it into a yes as well. It was constant rejection. I think that's just something that you have to accept, whether it be submitting offers for purchase, whether it be meeting landlords, offering them a management service, whether it be speaking to investors about raising money from them. The more contact, the more interaction you have, the better, the more refined that you'll become in terms of your pitch and your offering. And again, the more people that you're going to meet so that you can actually find people that you're going to gel with, that have your values, and then you can start to do business with them.
And I think there's a lot of people that really need to develop that thick skin around that and to move forward, isn't there? Because I think a lot of people can fail at the first hurdle when they get a no and it's instant rejection and they take it quite personally.
I think the biggest advice I'd give around that subject is that your first couple of years is so incredibly difficult to get off the ground if you're starting with very little capital, because this is a point where you don't necessarily have the reputation, you don't have the resource to go and deliver. But once you have had some wins, you have had some results, it's amazing how much that changes. And when you do start to see those results come in, you can look back after a year, 2 years, and see the progress that you've made and think, really, really glad that I stuck at that and continued to pursue doing what I was doing, because now it almost is like the tables have turned.
Yeah, so building the momentum up is a difficult thing, but once the momentum's there, I guess that you're now in a position where you've got landlords coming to you and they either want the guaranteed rent solution, or they might be looking for your management solution, but they're more coming to you rather than you seeking them out.
Yeah, I think our business would really benefit from a sourcing arm, because if we were to go out and actively look for those leads as well, we'd do really well, but we don't. All of our stuff is inbound lead generation. We've never been fantastic at marketing at all. It's always been referrals, organic growth, word of mouth, our existing clients bringing more properties to us or telling their friends. And that's made life really quite easy over the last couple of years, but that comes from delivering, doing what we're saying we're going to do. And that's how our business has started to evolve. But when I first started, I thought that purchasing would be my method. So whether it be JV, whether it be using investor funds, that was a period where for probably 2 years, I made absolutely zero progress whatsoever. Wasn't able to raise the finance, and rightly so. I wouldn't have been able to utilize it correctly. Didn't necessarily want to have a JV partner because I was always concerned about having somebody that was such a major shareholder in an asset-backed business like that. And things kind of morph and develop into different patterns or different ways of doing things. So we're now in a position where we are looking to buy much more heavily, but that's because we moved into the trading business, more of a no money down style service-based business that's allowed us to then move into the purchasing side.
Fantastic. So let's just talk about FA for a little bit. And I guess, we all know that there's changes afoot within the English market. Wales have already done a few bits. Scotland have tried to do some bits and had to pull back on certain parts of it. But, we are in a position where at the moment within England, we know that there's something coming. We know what the titles are, but we don't have the exact detail around that. But it is going to be a new planning class. It's going to be a registration. We've had safety measures already brought in within the short stay accommodation. What's your take on how that might affect the market going forward?
It's one that's evolved quite a lot since, I think it was about the 19th of February that it was initially announced, wasn't it, that they were looking at bringing in C5, either through permitted development or planning, and some form of licensing stroke registration scheme. When it initially happened, I thought, well, I always like to start a worst case scenario. What could this look like? So I imagined that with the registration scheme that it might be similar to the licensing, and therefore it could have some impact on mortgages and the lending. So making sure that people have the correct mortgage products, making sure that people are on business rates, obviously making sure that people are operating for a certain amount of days. I went to the Short Stay Summit. I think you were there as well, weren't you, Sarah?
Yes.
And it was quite insightful to hear, especially the gentleman from Airbnb who was talking about where he sees it heading this year. So I don't perceive that C5 will likely hit in summer or August like they plan on doing. What I took from sitting with him, I caught him while he was having his lunch, pinned him down and asked him a load of questions, is that it will be a light touch registration scheme this year. So that is about trying to gather all the information as to how many units are on the market, what do they look like, who's responsible for owning or managing those, what's the occupancy, what are the average daily rates like. And then I think they will look to introduce the C5 planning element, which I think will be the bit that shakes the industry up a lot more. I don't think the registration scheme will have that much of an impact. I think that's more data collection. I think once C5 comes in, that's when we'll start to see significant changes and impact to most operators.
And we've already, seen quite you started within short stay in 2019. Obviously, 2020, everything hit the fan and the world changed for a while. And, we really have seen, from my personal experience anyway, that as soon as COVID lifted a little bit, we had a major UK vacation boom, which has declined every year since. And I think anyone that's started in short stay around that sort of 2021, 22 period, they might be experiencing a different market today in 24. Has that been your experience as well from managing all the units?
It certainly has. I think it is almost twofold. I think the staycation boom that we saw off the back of COVID was an anomaly. People will often say to me, what does SA look like? And I don't think from somebody that's operated from 2019 to now, anybody could really say that this is a normal year. There hasn't been a normal. The industry is changing and evolving so much in terms of the amount of supply coming to the market, the anomaly years that we had during COVID, that there isn't necessarily a set or regular normal for us. We have seen a decrease in the holiday demand that we saw after COVID, but our demand element in the areas that we operate is still relatively similar. What has changed is the amount of supply. There has been a massive increase in the amount of units brought to the market from various different standards, different agencies, private individuals, and that's definitely had an impact. For us, occupancy has been relatively similar, but average daily rates have changed and they have started to decrease at times, especially throughout this first quarter of the year. Winter this year has been a harder year than any I've ever experienced in short stays. Mm-hmm. And I think that could be partly reflected due to the amount of supply, but also potentially, cost of living crisis that people are experiencing as well.
Yeah, I think, the glory days of opening something up, chucking it on one of the portals and sitting back and watching that money roll in, that was a short time frame. And, people have jumped into this industry. You know what? I don't think they're going to be here in a year's time. I think we'll have a little shakeout, just like we do in all areas of property. If you look at buy to let, you might have got a few, going back sort of 8 years, you might have got a few people that would jump in or they'd move house and then they'd rent their old house out and all of that sort of stuff. And eventually those guys kind of fall by the wayside. And I have absolutely no doubt that the short stay will do exactly the same. And I think that I embrace all the change in terms of registration and planning because it makes it more professional.
I think this year, regardless of any of the legislation changes, we'll probably see a shake-up. I think that's because of the amount of supply. Like you said, there's people testing the market, seeing if this is something they want to do. And I do think a lot of people get into this. And I think people tend to say they don't realise how hard it is or they think it's a really easy gig. And what I probably change that to is they don't realise how operationally intensive short stay is, whether it be your cleaners, linen management, guest management, maintenance. There's lots of different moving parts and it takes a lot of skill to manage at volume, all of those different avenues, really. If we see the C5 come in this year or early part of next year, that's where I really think there'll be the biggest shake-up and the biggest reduction in supply. And I could see that being as large as 40% of the market, leaving. If you look at a lot of the rent to SA sector, I think they will have a difficult time. If you sort of parallel this with the small paying guest guide, which came out last October, that would be something that anybody looking to get into short stay should really have a look at. That has a lot of information around what you need to be doing in terms of fire safety and compliance. And I think that's really one of the biggest motivating factors for the government wanting to have some intervention in this sector. And therefore, I think that's something that will come with a huge amount of cost. And, like you said, I think people will just get to a point where they think this is not worth it anymore. You know what? I'll go back to buy to let. I'll sell the place. I'll put all money into something different.
Yeah, which, that's kind of what they aimed for, isn't it? I think when they brought in the changes and the consultation, it was a twofold thing. I think they needed to understand how short stay was affecting the private rental sector, because as we know, rents have soared. And, people like to blame the landlord, saying, oh, they've all turned it into short stay. I'm not convinced that is the answer to the housing crisis. I think it's more of a supply and demand and the fact that there's just not building enough houses. But that aside, the poor vilified landlord in all of this. And also, obviously, it's the safety concerns as well, which, I run a small hotel. We have to be inspected every year. There's an awful lot of compliance on my shoulders. And yet the Airbnb that could be 3 or 4 doors down didn't have to do anything. And, it is wrong because it is people's safety. And, we need to make sure that the fire regs, especially, being in places where there's no thumb turns pre-October, it would baffle me that could even be allowed.
Fully agree. I think that is going to be something that's massively beneficial to the industry. And like I said, I welcome all of those changes as well. I think it will really raise the bar and raise the standard of accommodation for the guests as well. If it's the professional operators that are out there that are running compliant operations, I think the guests will have a much better service out of it as well.
So Dan, obviously you've got, a number of years, you've packed an awful lot into your number of years experience within property. What are you hoping to achieve over the next sort of 2 to 3 years? Where's the business and you going?
That's a great question. So we do have multiple focuses at the moment. So priority for me is always building our short stay management business. I really enjoy that because it really suits my personality type. We've got a really dynamic business here with a great team as well, from our property manager to sort of the guest comms team, operations supervisor and things. And for us, if we can help generate a landlord more income by running a short stays and maximising their income compared to any alternative, we want to go and help those. So we want to increase our managed portfolio and therefore get more guests through our doors. We also have a maintenance business as well, which operates locally, which sort of we're scaling very gently in the background, and that kind of happens organically as well.
Presumably you're not doing the joinery on that one.
I'm unfortunately not doing any of it, or that would not be a business anymore at all. I sometimes will turn up to properties and guests will say, "You're here for the maintenance." I think, oh, you couldn't ask for anybody worse.
I want to hope not.
But that was born out of the back of us delivering on the SA management side. It's a huge part of it, the maintenance is. So we started offering that out to other agencies and landlords as well. We also have a small cleaning business, but these are really just small bolt-ons that sit with our SA management business that we're hoping to prioritise and scale. Again, in the background, we also purchase properties as well. So we're looking to scale our buy-to-let portfolio and our serviced accommodation portfolio. And again, all of those properties will sit somewhere within the northwest. So anywhere within a 2.5 hour drive of sort of Stoke-on-Trent area is where we're looking. And again, just sort of trying to increase the standard of the SAs in the market through purchasing as well. So I'd shied away from it for quite a few years. I didn't want to necessarily go and compete with our clients and didn't want to kind of put our stock in the same area and look like we might prioritise any bookings. But instead, what I'm trying to do now is demonstrate this is what a property should look like. This is how you maximise your revenue. This is how you maximise the occupancy by doing these things, whether it be the zip and link beds, making sure that it's fresh, clean, relatively well renovated, and just trying to increase the standard and therefore helping our clients to do the same thing.
And, if you think back to your 17-year-old self, that vision of being on a beach somewhere, is that still a vision for an older Dan?
No, not at all. I've kind of gone the opposite way.
You fall in love with hard work.
Workaholic, absolutely. So I think when you're 17, or certainly for me, I'm sure it doesn't apply to everybody because maybe they're not as naive and mature and egotistical. It was like, I want a Lamborghini, I don't want to go to work, and I want all of these nice things and just to be able to be really, really lazy. And all of the things that I thought property would give me in terms of sort of the emotional monetary rewards aren't the things that I actually take joy from now. It's turning up to the office, having a purpose, having a team, putting people around us that are just so much better than me and being able to see them in their flow, enjoying work, getting great results for clients. So no, there's no desire to go and sit on a beach or slow down. That is, 20, 30 years away. It's just really about focusing and scaling this. And I'm not somebody that has a desire to get to a certain amount of properties and then, that's my cash flow figure. This is really a lot more of a purpose-driven thing now. It's about, what sort of brand can we build? What sort of impact can we have in the short stay space? What can we do in terms of providing better homes for tenants? And again, raising funds for investors and giving them a good return. And it's just become something that I'm so passionate about that, no, there's no beaches on the horizon.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And actually, I think it's really nice to hear that, because I think a lot of people do come into property with a figure in their head, a monetary figure in their head, and you sort of say, why are you doing this? And they'll go, because I want to earn this much per month. You know what I've found over the years of meeting lots and lots of different property professionals is it's never really about the money. It's about, as you say, a passion and a vision of what you want to be and how you want to spend your time. And the money is a thing that coincides with that, but it's definitely should never be the driving factor.
And there's two parts to that, because I often think that naivety or whatever the driving force is for you getting involved could be a good thing, because if you realize that it was this tough, it might stop people from doing it. But once you've committed and you start going, it really can turn into a passion, and you just become so much more competent at dealing with those challenges, overcoming them, and it becomes something that's really, really fun. So I don't think it matters too much as to why people get started, as long as they are ethical in their approach and they want to do things the correct way.
So I ask this to a lot of people, what do you think are the personality traits that make someone successful or have the longevity in this industry?
So for me, I realise for myself that my reputation is the most important thing, and that is what's going to enable me to have long-term success. So I would encourage anybody else to focus on being honest, having integrity, and focusing on delivering with their reputation. So it's all well and good us, marketing ourselves as great investors, service providers, but it has to be pinned on that delivery. So the character traits that sort of sit behind that, again, are your work ethic, are having an attitude of doing whatever it takes in order to get the job done. And not being short-sighted with things. It's not a case of trying to, get rich quick or have a quick win. This is really about what can you do for other people? And in turn, that is what will start to deliver the things that you actually want out of it. You'll automatically get paid if you're helping other people.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if you can solve someone's problem, then there's longevity in that, and everything else will come along as a result of it.
Yeah, fully agree.
So Dan, how can people get in touch with you? Just tell us a little bit about your stays and what you can offer potential landlords and property owners.
So we are a service accommodation management company, and for us, we want to help you if we can maximise your income on that particular property. So our goal is to increase your cash flow and reduce any of the headaches that you would have as a landlord. So our service is pretty much all encompassing. So generally we work with investors all across the country, as far, and then internationally as well, as far as Hong Kong, South Africa, Sweden. Some of these clients have never even seen the properties that they've purchased. Hand the keys to us, we can offer a full setup package, all of the marketing, all of the guest comms, all of the maintenance, linen, cleaning organisation. Most of our clients should not hear from us until the 21st of each month, when they simply receive a payment from us detailing who stayed, what the costs are, and what they're getting paid. So that's really our goal, maximising income for people and taking away the stress and the headache of property management by using guests. So if you want to get in touch, Facebook or Instagram would probably be a really good place. My Facebook is Dan Cheetham and my Instagram is Dan Cheetham Property. Or alternatively, you can visit yourstays.co.uk.
Amazing. Well, Dan, really, really appreciate you joining us today for This Property Life podcast. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And, I know that there was so much more we could have chatted about in terms of some of the ups and downs that you've had in the early years. But do you know what I think? We'll have to get you back on and we can explore that side of stuff on a different episode, because, for all of the good stuff that happens, there's always some bad stuff that goes on in the background, and it would be lovely just to have a refreshing chat about that stuff as well.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dan.